Friends, welcome back to our channel. The world stage is witnessing a cascade of transformative events, and today, we're diving deep into some of the most critical. We'll dissect how Russia's ongoing conflict in Ukraine isn't simply a clash of arms on the battlefield, but a much larger struggle playing out across the complex landscape of global economics, financial systems, and geopolitical power dynamics. While the dramatic headlines are often dominated by tanks and missiles, we will uncover a more nuanced reality. A conflict marked by crippling sanctions, escalating economic pressures, and rising domestic unrest. This struggle is truly exposing Russia's underlying vulnerabilities, its dwindling resources, and its increasing isolation on the global stage. Together, these often unseen forces are actively reshaping the nation's future, providing us with crucial insights into the broader implications of unchecked aggression. We are excited to delve into these narratives, so stay with us, and we will investigate how Russia's underlying economic frailties could potentially determine the ultimate trajectory of this brutal war. Let's embark on this comprehensive journey together. What is the genuine cost of Russia's campaign in Ukraine? The current war has placed an immense burden on Russia's financial system, and the consequences extend beyond what we see on the front lines. Financing such a prolonged war requires an unprecedented amount of resources, compelling the Kremlin to adopt severe measures that are increasingly unsustainable. One of the key factors that is amplifying Russia's economic distress is the unique dual financing system it has put in place. The official defense budget, at an estimated $250 billion, is paired with a clandestine scheme that coerces private banks into issuing preferential loans to defense contractors. These unsecured loans, which have ballooned to another $250 billion, essentially double the country's true military expenditure. Consequently, Russia's growth in its gross domestic product has slowed substantially. The third quarter of 2024 recorded a modest 3.1% increase, a downturn from 4.1% in the quarter prior. This deceleration clearly illustrates the burden of sustaining the war effort, which continues to demand an extraordinary commitment of resources, far surpassing the normal levels of spending in times of peace, and highlighting the growing financial burden being placed on the Kremlin. Corporate debt, already under strain, has surged by 71%, reaching a staggering $415 billion, which is equivalent to 19% of Russia's total gross domestic product. Many defense firms are also now struggling with losses over the last 2 years. Now these same firms are being artificially propped up by these coerced loans. Craig Kennedy, a former banker with extensive experience in Russian analysis, underscores the dire state of the Russian economy in his latest report. He highlights a remarkable 71% jump in corporate debt since 2022. This unprecedented growth absolutely dwarfs any new household or government borrowing, clearly revealing a financial system that is becoming more and more reliant on unsustainable mechanisms to just stay afloat. Inflation presents another critical concern, fueled by unrestrained borrowing and growing war-related costs. To stabilize the ruble, the central bank has raised interest rates up to 21%, and this action has stifled growth in the private sector. Businesses outside of the defense industry are now facing impossibly high borrowing costs, exacerbating the ongoing economic stagnation that plagues industries that are vital, such as manufacturing, agriculture, and consumer goods. This instability reveals how resources are being channeled more and more towards military objectives, while significantly hindering economic diversification. Public sentiment within Russia is also beginning to reflect the pressures of these policies. Ordinary citizens are growing increasingly concerned by rumors of potential limitations on bank deposits, fears made worse by official denials that often end up fueling even greater anxiety. A member of the State Duma has even introduced legislation requiring parliamentary approval before the central bank can freeze personal savings. While this measure is designed to reassure a nervous public, it will likely prove insufficient to restore confidence as economic instability continues to increase. The combined effect of increasing inflation, surging corporate debt, and the redirection of economic resources clearly reveal the hidden costs of Russia's actions in Ukraine. While the Kremlin attempts to project an image of strength and stability, these underlying weaknesses have begun to erode its capacity to sustain the conflict. As the financial pressures intensify, the risks of a systemic collapse only grow, highlighting the inherent fragility of Russia's wartime economy. Is Russia's banking sector now on the very edge of a major collapse? Russia's banking sector, previously considered a pillar of its economic stability, is now standing on extremely shaky ground, as the Kremlin's wartime financial policies begin to push institutions to their breaking points. The dual financing system being used to sustain the war effort, which encompasses both official budgets and covert bank loans, has created a ticking time bomb within Russia's financial system. One of the most alarming elements is the significant increase in corporate borrowing, which has reached an astounding $415 billion since the middle of 2022. Of this amount, an estimated $210 to $250 billion, approximately 21 to 25 trillion rubles, are in the form of mandatory loans to defense contractors. Craig Kennedy, former investment banker and also an associate of the Davis Center, describes this particular strategy as the cornerstone of Russia's clandestine war financing. This off-budget funding, while supporting military production, has created a precarious financial ecosystem, burdening banks with extremely high-risk liabilities and exacerbating economic instability across the board. Ordinarily, banks evaluate a borrower's ability to repay before issuing any credit. But it has now been revealed that in these cases, such due diligence has been completely abandoned. Many of these defense contractors, who have already been operating at a significant loss for consecutive years, now simply lack the resources needed to service these debts, leaving the banks saddled with high-risk liabilities. The strain is further exacerbated by the central bank's extremely aggressive monetary policies, which aim to combat inflation that has been fueled by these preferential lending practices. Interest rates have been hiked up to 20%. While this particular measure attempts to stabilize the ruble, it has had very severe consequences for the private sector. Borrowing has become prohibitively expensive for businesses that are outside of the defense industry. This has stifled economic growth, and it has created a very hostile economic environment for small and medium-sized enterprises, which are critical components of economic stability. The public's confidence in the overall banking system is eroding. There are already very real fears of frozen deposits, which have spread among ordinary Russians, fueled by memories of past financial crises and a sense of ongoing economic uncertainty. Alexei Nechayev, a deputy of the State Duma, recently demanded legislation to ensure that any decision by the central bank concerning citizen savings would require prior parliamentary approval. He stated that any decision by the central bank about the savings of ordinary citizens can only be made with State Duma approval. However, experts note that such a law is extremely unlikely to be enacted, as authorities would need to act very quickly to implement any similar measures. This simply reflects the increased anxieties surrounding Russia's banking sector. These events highlight deep systemic vulnerabilities within the Russian banking sector. By coercing banks to underwrite the current war effort, the Kremlin has severely compromised the overall financial system's stability. Without significant reform or external relief, these cracks that have begun to appear within the banking system could easily widen into a full-blown crisis. This would further undermine Russia's ability to sustain its military and economic ambitions. How long can Russia survive without its vital oil revenue? Oil has long been the foundation of Russia's economy, consistently funding its government expenditure as well as its military operations. However, this extremely important revenue stream is now under significant stress, with both internal and external forces disrupting the Kremlin's financial lifeline. The combination of Western sanctions, targeted Ukrainian strikes, and extremely volatile global oil prices has now created a perfect storm, threatening to erode Russia's entire economic foundation. One of the most immediate challenges comes from Ukraine's precision strikes on Russian oil infrastructure. Recent attacks on oil depots in the Voronezh and Kursk regions have not only severely damaged storage facilities, but they've also disrupted logistical operations that are critical to Russia's strategic bombing campaigns. Ukrainian forces have reportedly cut Russia's bombing capacity by 9,900 sorties. This has been achieved by targeting the fuel sources necessary for its air operations. These strikes send a very clear message. Ukraine can now extend the battlefield deep into the heart of Russia's economic resources, thus forcing the Kremlin to divert additional resources to protect vital infrastructure. Sanctions that have been imposed by Western nations have compounded these challenges. Recent measures which target Russia's shadow fleet have stranded at least 65 oil tankers, idling in waters near Russia, off the coast of Singapore, and around Chinese ports. This has severely disrupted the offshore crude exports. This logistical bottleneck is further amplified by a reduction in global demand for Russian oil, as nations in Europe and elsewhere are now diversifying their energy imports. The stranded tankers are now a very tangible symbol of Russia's growing isolation in global energy markets, highlighting the effectiveness of coordinated international pressure. Volatility in oil prices is adding another layer of complexity. Brent crude prices recently jumped to over $81 per barrel. This happened in early Monday, following a 3% increase on Friday. It was directly caused by expanded United States sanctions on Russian oil. This very fluctuation highlights the precarious nature of Russia's reliance on fossil fuels as a cornerstone of its economy. The volatility in the oil markets, influenced by current geopolitical tensions and sanctions, simply illustrates the vulnerabilities inherent in Moscow's overdependence on this revenue stream. While facing increasing international pressure, these price swings are also influenced by a mix of geopolitical tensions, production adjustments by OPEC+, and attempts by countries such as Saudi Arabia to stabilize the markets on a global scale. Despite these particular factors, Russia's extremely limited ability to control or predict these dynamics leaves its economy exposed to external shocks. For a country that has now converted much of its economy into a wartime footing, these disruptions are carrying profound implications. Oil revenues, which once accounted for about a third to a half of Russia's federal budget, are no longer a reliable source of income. The decreased flow of funds not only undermines Russia's capacity to sustain its current military campaign, but also exacerbates the strain on domestic programs, which are already reeling from resource reallocation to the war effort. In the face of these mounting pressures, the Kremlin's options are extremely limited. Attempts to find alternative buyers, such as expanding trade with China and India, have only produced mixed results. Both nations are now demanding very steep discounts, further eating into Russia's profit margins. Meanwhile, attempts to circumvent sanctions using shadow operations have proven increasingly risky and unsustainable. Ultimately, the siege on Russia's oil revenues is not simply an economic issue. It is a strategic one. The degradation of this extremely critical sector diminishes Russia's capacity to project power and also sustain its geopolitical ambitions. As the Ukraine conflict continues to drag on, the Kremlin faces an extremely uphill battle to stabilize its very energy-dependent economy, making oil both a weapon as well as a major vulnerability in this very high-stakes confrontation. Before we delve deeper into this analysis, I'd like to ask for your support for our channel. If you're finding this content informative, please consider clicking that subscribe button and giving this video a like. It would greatly assist us in reaching a wider audience. Also, please feel free to leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Your feedback is extremely valuable to us, and we really appreciate you being here. Now, please stick with us until the end, because we're going to be putting it all together with some very important conclusions at the end. Thank you. Has Russia now lost its place on the global stage? The war in Ukraine has not only weakened the Russian economy, but has also significantly eroded its overall geopolitical influence. Historically regarded as a dominant power in many regions like Central Asia, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe, Russia now finds itself increasingly isolated as both traditional allies and global rivals are now capitalizing on its vulnerabilities. One very clear example of this isolation is Russia's deteriorating relationships in the Middle East. In Syria, where Moscow has long supported Bashar al-Assad's regime, Russian naval vessels have recently been barred from re-entering the Tartus base. This blockage has now stranded equipment as well as troops, disrupting Moscow's ability to project power in one of its most strategically significant overseas bases. The inability to maintain logistical and military support in Syria highlights the growing limitations of Russia's overall reach. Russia's reputation as a reliable arms supplier, once a cornerstone of its foreign policy, has also taken a severe hit. Very high-profile failures of military hardware, such as the T-72 tanks and the S-400 missile systems, have undermined confidence among traditional buyers. Nations like India and Egypt, which had historically relied on Russian arms, are now diversifying their defense procurement by turning to Western suppliers. This shift not only reduces Moscow's overall influence, but also threatens one of its most lucrative revenue streams. Western sanctions have further amplified Russia's geopolitical isolation. These measures have targeted key sectors like energy and technology, cutting off extremely important revenue and hindering its ability to sustain any type of international ambition. For instance, sanctions against Russia's shadow oil fleet have now stranded dozens of tankers and have disrupted 20% of offshore crude exports. This logistical bottleneck diminishes Russia's leverage in global energy markets and also weakens its influence over energy-dependent nations. Meanwhile, NATO's expansion has drastically reshaped the security landscape in Europe. The inclusion of Finland and Sweden has fortified the alliance's eastern flank, effectively reducing Russia's ability to exert any pressure on its neighbors. Eastern European countries, specifically Poland and the Baltic states, have significantly bolstered their defenses, acquiring advanced military systems such as Patriot missiles and F-35 fighter jets. These developments demonstrate a collective resolve among Western nations to deter Russian aggression, further isolating Moscow both diplomatically and militarily. Russia's diminishing influence is also very evident in Central Asia, a region it once dominated. China has increasingly filled the void left by Russia's retreat, expanding its economic and diplomatic reach through initiatives such as the Belt and Road Initiative. Turkey, too, has capitalized on Russia's weakened position, strengthening ties with key players in the Middle East and Central Asia. This shift reveals a growing competition for influence in regions that have traditionally been considered Russia's backyard. In conclusion, Russia's geopolitical isolation is a direct consequence of its military setbacks, economic pressures, and the global response to its actions in Ukraine. Without significant reforms and a recalibration of its foreign policy, Russia risks losing its position as a major global power. This war has not only exposed the fragility of its geopolitical strategy, but also accelerated its marginalization on the international stage. Is Putin losing the war at home? The prolonged war in Ukraine has created serious repercussions within Russia, amplifying the economic strain on its citizens and fostering a growing discontent. While the Kremlin tries to project an image of strength, the domestic challenges that are stemming from this conflict are becoming increasingly difficult to conceal. One of the most significant issues facing ordinary Russians is the skyrocketing inflation, which has severely eroded their purchasing power. The price of staples like bread and fuel has surged, straining household budgets across the nation. The central bank's decision to raise interest rates to 21% in an attempt to stabilize the ruble has further compounded the financial burden. High borrowing costs have stifled business growth, particularly outside of the defense sector, leaving many small and medium-sized businesses struggling to survive. Wage stagnation also adds another layer to this economic hardship. Coupled with rapidly rising costs, many Russians are simply unable to afford basic necessities. This financial pressure has sparked a growing anxiety about the security of personal savings. Reports of potential deposit freezes or restrictions on bank withdrawals have heightened the public's distrust in financial institutions. Alexei N.V., a member of the State Duma, even introduced legislation to ensure parliamentary oversight before any such measures could be implemented. However, these reassurances have done little to quell the fears among the populace. The war's impact on soldiers and their families is equally troubling. Thousands of troops have been killed or wounded, and returning veterans often report inadequate compensation and substandard medical care. These grievances echo those from historical conflicts, such as the Soviet-Afghan War, where dissatisfaction among soldiers ultimately contributed to a broader societal unrest. The parallels to past failures underscore the Kremlin's inability to address these systemic issues effectively. Furthermore, the government's decision to redirect resources away from social programs and towards military expenditures has severely weakened the nation's overall social safety nets. Pensions, healthcare, and education budgets have all been slashed, leaving vulnerable populations particularly exposed. Low-income families and pensioners, who rely very heavily on government support, are disproportionately affected, deepening the divide between the Kremlin and its citizens. Adding to these current challenges is the memory of the Wagner Mutiny, which revealed cracks in Russia's internal stability. Though the rebellion was quelled, it highlighted the potential for unrest within both the military and civilian populations. Experts have warned that continued economic decline and dissatisfaction could easily ignite larger protests or even elite defections, further threatening Putin's grip on power. In conclusion, the domestic fallout from Russia's war in Ukraine is becoming an increasing challenge for the Kremlin. Inflation, resource misallocation, and a growing public discontent are all eroding confidence in the government's ability to manage this crisis. Without meaningful reforms, these pressures could escalate, jeopardizing both the stability of Putin's regime and the nation's long-term social cohesion. What can the world learn from Russia's mistakes? Russia's ongoing economic and military crisis underscores the profound consequences of unchecked aggression, systemic mismanagement, and an over-reliance on outdated strategies. The war in Ukraine has not only revealed Russia's underlying vulnerabilities, but also provided critical insights for the global community on the dynamics of modern conflict and economic resilience. One of the most important lessons is the need for innovation and adaptability in both military and economic strategies. Russia's reliance on antiquated equipment, rigid military doctrines, and unsustainable economic policies has significantly hampered its effectiveness both on the battlefield and in its overall standing on the world stage. In contrast, Ukraine's ability to leverage modern technology, coupled with very strategic international partnerships, has demonstrated how agility and cooperation can counter even a seemingly superior adversary. The crisis also highlights the real power of sanctions and coordinated international action. Western sanctions, specifically targeting Russia's energy exports, banking sector, and access to critical technologies, have greatly compounded the Kremlin's difficulties, proving that economic measures can serve as a powerful tool in current geopolitical conflicts. This collective approach has not only isolated Russia, but has also reinforced the critical importance of multilateralism in addressing current global security challenges. Domestically, the situation in Russia is a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing military ambitions over economic stability and societal welfare. The redirection of resources to sustain the current war effort has eroded public trust, strained social safety nets, and exacerbated overall inequality. These internal fractures strongly suggest that sustainable governance requires carefully balancing national security with the overall well-being of its citizens. For the global community, Russia's predicament serves as a reminder of the importance of accountability, transparency, and collaboration. Supporting nations like Ukraine not only strengthens democratic principles, but it also deters any type of future acts of aggression. Moreover, fostering international dialogue and building very resilient economic systems are critical to preventing similar crises from destabilizing other regions. Ultimately, the war in Ukraine strongly underscores the interconnectivity of economic, military, and political stability in an extremely globalized world. The important lessons learned from this conflict must guide future policies, emphasizing the need for innovation, unity, and a firm commitment to peace and security. Only through a collective effort can the international community address the challenges of the 21st century and hopefully build a more stable and equitable world. The content on this channel is intended for informational and educational purposes only. While we always strive to provide balanced analysis on all political and military topics, the views that are expressed here do not reflect those of any government organization or political entity. If this analysis has improved your understanding of these very critical issues, we greatly encourage you to give this video a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth discussions. And before you go, click on the video displayed on your screen to explore how geopolitical alliances are reshaping the global order. Together, let's stay informed, engaged, and committed to building a more peaceful world. Friends, as promised, we have now reached the conclusion of our analysis on the multifaceted impacts of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Before we present a final summary of our insights, we want to take a moment to express our sincere gratitude for all of you who have been with us throughout this journey of discovery. Our goal with this channel is to keep you updated and informed, Your engagement is the reason we are here. The insights we've presented here today are, we hope, very significant for our understanding of the dynamics of contemporary global conflict. We would like you to know that these final conclusions that we have made are based solely on the facts and information that have been laid out before you in our analysis. In closing, the current war in Ukraine has laid bare some of the most important lessons for the international community, but also serves as a stark warning for nations that choose aggression. We have clearly seen that unchecked military ambitions, when paired with flawed economic planning, lead directly to instability and isolation on the world stage. We have also seen the vital importance of robust international cooperation and the power of economic sanctions in deterring any type of aggression. The Ukrainian conflict further reveals the significance of adaptability and innovation in both military and economic strategies, as well as the need to balance military strength with long-term economic and societal well-being. Russia's failure to do so has created a crisis, underscoring that true strength lies in the ability to foster internal stability and to secure global partnerships. The current conflict in Ukraine also stands as a crucial case study in the long-term costs of authoritarianism. A rigid, inflexible government is often unable to respond effectively to emerging threats and pressures from the international community. When coupled with an unaccountable military-industrial complex, such regimes often lead to widespread suffering for their own citizens, as we're seeing. The challenges currently faced by Russia highlight the global interconnectivity of politics, economics, and defense, emphasizing the necessity for a more comprehensive and balanced approach to international relations. Ultimately, the path forward requires not only learning from these mistakes, but also actively working to strengthen international institutions, support democracy, and invest in peaceful diplomacy. The world must not only take the time to understand the specific lessons from this conflict, but it must also use them to work toward more equitable and just systems globally. As always, we are deeply committed to providing you with the highest quality information and encourage you to stay engaged in our collective pursuit of truth. Please keep sharing your thoughts with us and subscribe to our channel if you would like to stay up to date on these incredibly important issues. And now, until our next video, we bid you farewell and wish you peace and fortitude.